Okay, just checking. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so let me begin. So this is going to be a continuation of this course on geometry and entanglement, which started last year. And most of the course information can be found here, which also has the link to the last year's lectures. I'll try to spend the first 2 lectures reviewing what happened in the last year, but I'll not give any derivation. Okay, so you should really consult these lectures to see the details. The other thing is that I'll try to record and put them on the HRI channel in the same place. In case you notice that I'm not recording, please let me know. Okay, right now I think I'm recording, but sometimes I may forget. So just I'm telling this to everybody to keep a track of whether it's being recorded. Okay, so let me start with the description of ADS-CFT correspondence. In fact, this probably I'll describe only next time. Okay, but this is going to be the main framework in which we are going to discuss this issue. Okay. So let me begin by describing what is ADS space. Okay, so ADS D+1 means D+1 dimensional ADS space or anti-de Sitter space. So D+1 dimensional anti-de Sitter space. One stands for time and D space dimension. And the way one describes it, so we describe usually, okay, at least one simple way to describe it by embedding it in D+2 dimension. And this is very similar to the way we describe, for example, a sphere, a 2-dimensional sphere, by writing an equation in 3 dimensions. Okay, x square plus y square plus z square equal to a square. So let me now describe how it is done. So we introduce D+2 coordinates, T1, T2, and say x1 to xd. And we write an equation of the form T1 square plus T2 square where this is just a constant. And the equation is being written in a space with a metric in D+2 dimension is ds square, which is minus d. So this metric as well as this equation clearly has SOD, 2 isometry. Okay, namely, if we make an SOD, 2 transformation on these D+2 variables, okay, then the equation continues to be satisfied and the metric remains the same. Furthermore, this isometry acts transitively. Which basically means that any point can be moved to any other point under this symmetry. At any point on the surface, on this subspace, can be moved to any other point. Okay, and this is going to be important for us later. And this is very much like the surface of a sphere. Like the surface of a sphere. okay, which you say two-dimensional sphere called S2. Okay, and there the isometric group is SO3, okay, three-dimensional rotation group. And we are all familiar with the fact that using this SO3 symmetry, okay, any point on the sphere can be moved to any other point. Okay, so that's what I mean. One means by saying that it acts transitively. But now we are going to introduce intrinsic coordinate on ADS D plus 2, just like on the sphere, for example, the intrinsic coordinates are theta and phi. Even though we write it as an equation in 3 dimensions, it's really a 2-dimensional space. So we introduce intrinsic coordinates. On ADS T plus 1, which will denote by TR and theta 1 to theta D minus 1. So they are altogether D plus 1 coordinates, as it should be in a D plus 1 dimensional space. So the way we introduce this is the following. So we take T1 as square root of R square plus R square cos T, T2 as square root of R square plus R square sine T. And then X1 as R cos theta 1, X2 as R sine theta 1 cos theta 2, etc. And it goes like this, just like the spherical polar coordinates. So finally, XD minus 1 will be R sine theta 1 up to sine theta D minus 1. And you can easily verify that this satisfies the equation that we wrote down, namely T1 squared plus T2 squared minus sum over I equal to 1 to D T minus 1 xi square is automatically R squared. Okay. And that's because from this definition it follows that this is just R squared. Okay, so you can just substitute this here and you can check that this equation is satisfied automatically. Now, one point to notice is that if you
Sir, all these i's should run up to D, right? All the XD.
Sorry, thank you. No, did I make a mistake? Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, you're right. Theta runs up to D minus 1. I think, yeah, here I did D. Right. Thank you. So this should be XD. But XD minus 1, we have ultimate last thing, one as cos theta D minus 1. Okay, and XD gets is sine theta D minus 1. Okay. Now, one point that I want to emphasize is that when we introduce these variables like this, okay, there is a periodic identification, right? Because T and T plus 2 pi describes exactly the same point in the original space. Okay. So T and T plus 2 pi describe same points in the original space. But in our definition of ADS, so in defining ADS D plus 1, we drop this identification. Namely, T and T plus 2 pi will take to be different points. Okay. So we'll take minus infinity less than T to infinity. Okay. So this is sometimes called the universal counter. So the ADS space is not quite what I described in the last slide. Okay, it's not quite described by this equation. Okay. but it's described by a universal cover of this. Okay, and this has some circle direction which you open up and make this into a line. Okay, that's what it means. And I'll leave it as an exercise to check. In fact, we probably did it in detail in the last year, that when you now restrict the metric on this subspace, ds squared is given by minus r squared plus r squared dt squared plus dr squared.
Ashok?
Yes, go ahead, please.
So suppose we did some computation in this embedding space, right?
Yes.
What kind of computations are there where we have to keep in mind that we did this unwinding?
Well, we actually will not do computation in the embedding space.
Okay.
But we will see this identification, what it would mean in terms of the ADS space that you have defined, right? I mean, there will be a time direction, and it will just mean that the time direction will be periodically identified.
Okay.
Which is not a very good thing, because that will give two close time like cards, right? Which you don't want. So you are basically opening up the time direction to have infinite extent. Okay, are the other questions? Okay, so this d omega d minus 1 square, okay, this is the metric on unit d minus 1 sphere, which I'll denote by sd minus 1. Okay, so this is basically parameterized by those theta 1 to theta d minus 1. Okay, so parameters of this space are theta 1 to theta d minus 1, just like theta and phi parameterize the sphere. Now, it's also convenient to introduce a slightly different coordinate system. Okay, although it's really slightly different, okay, it doesn't introduce any new feature. And here I introduce a coordinate. Instead of using the variable r, we introduce a coordinate rho by r equal to tan rho. And in this case, the only advantage here is that r runs from 0 to infinity, but rho runs from 0 to pi by 2. As r runs from 0 to infinity. And the metric in this coordinate system has the form r square sec square rho minus dt square plus d rho square plus sine square rho d omega d minus 1 square. Okay, so this is the form of the metric in this. It's straightforward to go from here to here.
Sir, I think there is a capital R with R10 row.
Capital R with, yes, thank you. Oh, thank you. Okay, so let me write this metric again. So ds squared is sec square rho. Sorry, there is r square sec square rho times minus dt square plus d rho square plus sine square rho d omega d minus 1 square. Okay, so this also shows rho equal to near rho equal to 0. It's just a regular point because it's like d rho square plus rho square d omega d minus 1 square, which is just the flat metric written in the polar coordinates. Okay, so rho equal to 0 is a perfectly regular point. Okay, this of course at rho equal to 0 is just 1. But rho equal to pi by 2, of course, is a boundary. It's actually infinite distance away, even though it looks like finite coordinates here. Okay, because x square rho blows up. Anyway, let's represent this in the rho coordinate system. So in the rho coordinate system, this ADS space looks like this rho t theta coordinate system. The ADS space looks like a cylinder. Well, it's a generalized cylinder, of course. It's a d plus 2 one dimensional space. So here, what I've drawn is that this is the time direction. This radial direction is the rho direction. So that means this distance is pi by 2. And this direction, okay, this is the theta direction. Okay, so here, what I've drawn here is really ADS 3, okay, for which d equal to 2, okay, because I have just drawn a circle, okay, because I cannot draw it, draw higher dimensional space, but you can imagine that this circle will be replaced by a sphere in higher dimensional ADS. Okay. And now you can see that if for example, you had taken this periodic identification, right? If t was identified with t plus 2 pi, what will happen is that this direction will be identified with period 2 pi, right? So the cylinder will fold onto itself. But we don't want to do that, okay? Because you don't want closed time like curves. So t is taken from minus infinity to infinity. Now, here we'll study the motion of light ray. Okay, so we know that light travels along null geodesic. Okay, so geodesic equation, of course, is a bit complicated, but the fact that it's null, this implies that we must have ds square equal to 0. And now we can look at the radial null geodesic. Where light travels along the radial direction. And this basically means that no motion in the angular direction, right? That's what the radial motion means. No motion in angular direction. So d omega d minus 1 equal to 0. And then that tells us that we must have minus dt square plus d rho square equal to 0. So rho equal to plus minus t. Okay, plus constant you can have. So this means that in this, as long as the light travels in the radial direction, that means there is no spread in the angular direction, there's movement in the angular direction. The trajectories will be 45-degree angle. Okay, rho equal to plus minus t is that 45-degree angle in the rho t subspace. So now let's consider an object, okay, which is at rho equal to 0. Take an observer at rho equal to 0. So the trajectory of that observer is basically along this line. Okay, this is time-like curve. One can easily show that this is geodesic, although it's not going to be very important for us. Okay, so imagine that an observer in space-time moving in this direction, okay, which basically really means that it's stationary at rho equal to 0. Okay, only the time is changing. And now let's imagine that that observer sends out a radial light. Sends out a radial light ray. So it goes out at 45-degree. And let's imagine that after it reaches the boundary, it gets reflected back. and comes back. Okay, so that's also has to happen at 45 degree. Now, without doing any calculation, you can see, sorry, this should be direction. Without doing any calculation, you can see that this we already know is pi by 2. So that means, because it's 45 degree, okay, this is pi by 2. And this is pi by 2. So the light ray goes to the boundary and comes back in time pi. So light ray comes back in time pi. Okay, so the observer who is sitting at the origin will receive the signal back at time pi. Okay. And this is despite the fact that even though the boundary is infinite distance away. Okay. It doesn't look like infinite distance here. Okay, it looks like distance pi by 2, but of course you should keep in mind that there is this x square rho sitting outside. Okay. So when you actually calculate the radial distance to the boundary, it's infinite distance. Okay. And you can also see it in the r coordinate system. Okay, if you integrate this from r equal to 0 to infinity, you really get infinite distance. So even though the boundary is infinite distance away, it goes and comes back in finite time, and that's a peculiar property of ADS. Yes, is there a question? Okay, so this is
Excuse me, sir.
yes, go ahead, please.
Here here the ADS space behaves in a very weird manner, but it can't be the case that this is just the artifact of coordinates. Means how we can really identify this T with the time direction.
Okay, is the proper time of the observer who is sitting at the rho equal to 0.
Okay.
At rho equal to 0, okay, up to this scaling, r is of course just a constant, right? At rho equal to 0, this is just 1. So the proper time of the observer is r times t, right? So it's still a finite time.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Okay, so the other thing I want to tell you about is the equation that the ADS matrix satisfies. So the ADS d plus 1 metric that I wrote down. R mu nu minus half R G mu nu is 8 pi G T mu nu. This is of course standard Einstein's equation. But the important point is the form of T mu nu. So T mu nu is d times d minus 1 over 8 pi G R square times G mu nu. And this is the signals. The fact that T mu nu is proportional to G mu nu is the signal that it's a cosmological constant. And this in fact represents a negative cosmological constant. It's negative because T00, okay, which is the energy density, is proportional to G00, but G00 of course is negative. Okay. So that means that the energy density is negative, and that's what one means by saying that it's a negative cosmological constant. Okay, so this is as much as I'll say about the geometry of ADS. Now, let me turn to quantization of a scalar field in ADS background. So quantization of a scalar field in ADS. So the action is the standard action that I'll start with. So from this, we can derive the equation of motion. Which is box minus m square I equal to 0. Okay, where box phi is d mu phi. But this can also be written as okay, this is a standard identity that one has in general relativity. Okay, so that you don't have to worry about, if you use this form, you don't have to worry about Christoffel symbol. Okay, so for solving scalar equations, it's easier to use this form. So one can work out the basis of classical solutions. And I'll just state the result. Okay, so these are the analog of plane waves. So I'll denote this by FNLM T r theta. Okay, theta are d minus 1 coordinates. So this has the form psi NL of r, okay, function of the radial coordinate YLM of theta. Okay, these are the generalizations of the spherical harmonics from S2 to SD minus 1. Okay, so instead of having one M, there'll be a multiple M. And then, of course, the time dependence is e to the minus I omega NL T. So this is a known function. I'll not write it down. Last time, I think I did write it down in the last lectures. These are spherical harmonics, d minus 1 dimensional spherical harmonics. And of course, there are also complex conjugate. And you have to add to this NLM star. Okay, they are independent basis. I'll give the result for the expression for omega NL soon. Maybe I should write it here only. Okay. So here n and n are integers. NL greater than or equal to 0, and they are integers. And M also is a collection of integers. Omega NL is determined in terms of these objects. It's given by delta plus L plus 2n, where delta is d by 2 plus half square root b square plus 4m square r square. So one thing to note is that it has discrete spectrum. And this is, of course, discrete spectrum we are familiar with when we have a compact space. Okay. But here the spatial slice, of course, is non-compact because R goes all the way to infinity. right? R runs from 0 to infinity. Okay, so this is really an infinite dimensional space, okay, at a fixed time. Okay. Nevertheless, the reason that it's quantized is because the metric on ADS-D plus 1 provides a kind of attractive potential and this is responsible for quantization. Now I should say at this stage that this is somewhat fake. Okay, when you say attractive potential, normally attractive potential means attracting towards something, right? Some point. Okay, and indeed in this coordinate system, okay, what you're calling attractive potential is attractive towards the origin. Okay, effectively you see that there is an attractive potential towards the origin. Okay. But at the same time, if you recall, I have told you that any point in ADS-D plus 1 can be moved to any other point, okay, by the SOD, 2 isometry, okay, and which is a symmetry. Okay. So see, clearly the origin is no spatial point. Okay. It just so happens that in this particular coordinate system, okay, that we are working with, okay, you have broken manifest SOD, 2 isometry. Okay, and that's why we see as if there is an attractive potential. Okay, so that's something we should keep in mind. Okay, but in this coordinate system, indeed there is a kind of attractive potential, and that's what is responsible for quantization. Okay. And we'll see it more clearly in the next slide, next page.
So
Yes, go ahead, please.
I'm not sure whether we should use the word attractive even in the sense placed here, because this is a static metric, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, why are we even trying to say something like attractive potential? Like,
No, I mean, Coulomb potential is attractive, right? That's also static.
yeah, but in the sense that for a positive cosmological constant in a de Sitter metric, that is an evolving and expansive universe.
Yes.
In that sense, people do say repulsive potential, but
well, see, this is attractive in the sense that it's the attraction on a particle, a test particle, right? Just like gravity is attractive. I mean, if you have a Earth's gravitational field, right?
Yeah.
A particle gets attracted towards the center. So it's attractive in that sense. That a test particle tend to fall towards the center. Okay. Maybe I can make it explicit in the by saying the following. Okay, that if you look at the behavior of the wave function, okay, larger behavior of the wave function, it's damped. Okay, psi NL goes as r to the power minus d by 2 plus half square root of d square plus 4m square r square. So that is the same delta. So this is damped. The other solution, okay, this is a second order differential equation. Okay, once you say fix a given, once you fix the theta dependent, the LM, the theta dependence, okay, and omega, okay, it will be a second order differential equation. So there are two solutions. Okay, the other solution that we get is the other solution is r to the power minus d by 2 minus half square root of d square plus 4m square r square. Okay. So this grows more rapidly because this minus and minus makes it plus, right? So this is this doesn't fall off as fast as this one, okay? And this in fact is non-normalizable, and that's why we discard it. Okay? So this is discarded because it's not normalizable. Okay? And this is the kind of thing that happens in an attractive potential, right? Because if you have an attractive potential, okay, then you have typically two solutions to Schrodinger equation. One you keep, the other one you don't keep because the other one is not normalizable. Okay? And the physics is similar here. Okay? So in that sense, you can say that this is the metric on ADS, okay, is behaving as if it's providing an attractive potential. Okay, that out of the two solutions, you only keep one. Are there questions? Okay. And essentially, this is the reason why omega is quantized. So this is the reason why omega is quantized. Because you have discrete eigenvalues, right? And the discrete energy eigenvalues, and discrete energy eigenvalues clearly the signal that there is some kind of attractive potential. It's not a scattering state, it's like a bound state.
Sir,
Yes, go ahead, please.
we should have talked about normalizability after we had defined some kind of a norm, right?
Yeah, I'm going to do that immediately, right now. Okay, the inner product. It's basically the Klein-Gordon inner product. Okay, so let me do that. So we define the inner product. Let's say you have two functions f and g. Well, I have called it h and f. Let me do that because g is metric, so there will be confusion. Okay, h and f. So hf inner product is defined as follows. So it's I integral d dx So what is sigma? Sigma is any spatial slice. Okay. Most of the time we are going to take sigma as the constant time slice. Okay. So t equal to constant. Okay. But this formula is valid in general. So if you draw the cylinder, this picture of ADS as a cylinder, sigma is any spatial slice that cuts across. Okay. Any space like slice. So you can take, for example, a surface like this. Okay. But constant time slices will be like this, horizontal slice. Okay. So this is our sigma. So you integrate this over sigma. Okay. So gamma, this is the metric on sigma, okay, induced metric on sigma. N is the normal vector to sigma. And these are self-explanatory, right? This is the del mu basically is del x, which I should have said earlier. So del mu is del x. Yeah, we'll use this earlier also while defining the Klein-Gordon action. Okay. So this inner product, okay, has the feature that suppose we have a sigma, okay, and we fix the boundary of sigma. Okay, then this one doesn't depend on the how you fill the integral. Okay. So HF does not depend on how we feel the interior of sigma. Namely, given a boundary, okay, imagine that you have chosen another surface like this. Oops. Okay, maybe I shouldn't draw it like this. Let me is this. Let's imagine that you have fixed a boundary, okay, and you have one surface like this, and draw another surface, maybe somewhere here, which is which also has the same boundary, but it just hangs inside. Okay. One can show that this doesn't depend on how you feel the interior. Okay. And basically, what happens is that this integral you can actually the difference. Okay, so is there's a volume that is enclosed between these two subspaces, right? And what one can show is that this can be written as total divergence integrated over the volume, and the total divergence actually is zero. Okay, so this is the difference between doing this over here and that doing this over another surface, okay, can be related to integral of zero, okay, which of course is zero. Okay. But there is something more, and that is that if so this is one, okay, but the more important property that we're going to use is that if H and F are normalizable, then HF does not depend on sigma at all. Okay. So you don't have to keep the boundary fixed. Okay. And the reason is again is the same. Okay. Because if the boundary is not fixed, okay, then that means there is also some surface integral. Okay, if you are integrating something a zero, which is a total divergence, okay, you can write it as a surface integral. It will include the difference between this and the other surface, but it will also include some boundary integrals. Okay. And those boundary integrals vanish if H and F are normalized. Okay. And namely, if H and F fall off sufficiently fast, okay, like this, if each of them fall off like this, then one can show that the result is independent of the choice of sigma. Okay. Which means that if we take constant time slice, okay, which is what we are going to take, okay, then this inner product doesn't depend on the choice of the time slice. Okay, at all time it's the same inner product. Okay, so it's preserved in time. So that's in fact the reason why we define the inner product this way. So for t equal to constant slices, HF is independent of C. Okay, so with this definition, okay, one can show that if we take the inner product between F n L m and F n prime L prime m prime, and this is given by delta n n prime, delta L L prime, delta m n prime. Now, because this is a complete set of basis states, any solution of equation of motion can be expanded in this basis. So these are constants. So these are constants. Okay, and these are complex conjugate. So now from here we can go to quantization. Okay, now we think of phi as a quantum field. So first we have to regard a NLM as operator. And then you have to replace this star by NLM dagger. And then you impose the commutation relation. Which is phi t x. Okay, so x basically has r and theta. Phi equal time commutation relation ty is I delta d delta dx minus y. Okay. So here I have set I h bar equal to 1. And what is pi? Pi is the conjugate momentum. So pi is basically delta L delta of del naught phi, which if you work this out, this is square root of minus determinant g 0 0 del 0 phi. Okay, because g has no mixed component, so 0 is the time coordinate. So you can calculate pi, okay, and then just impose this commutation and substitute for phi as this. Pi will involve derivative of phi, but that of course is determined from here because derivative, the time dependence of f is known, right? It's e to the I omega n L times t. So that can be used to generate the commutation relation between A and A dagger. Okay. And of course, you also have the other relations, phi phi and pi pi are 0. So at the end of it, we get the commutation relation A N L M A dagger n prime L prime n prime as delta n n prime delta L L prime delta m m prime, and then you have the A N L M A n prime L prime m prime. These are 0. So these act as ordinary creation annihilation operator, and using that we can now construct the spectrum. So we define the vacuum such that A NLM on the vacuum equal to 0 for all NLM, and then excited states are A NLM dagger on vacuum, A NLM dagger A n prime L prime N prime dagger on vacuum, and so on. And the energies, so this has E as omega NL, this has E equal to omega NL plus omega n prime L. Okay, so this is standard as in normal free scalar field theory, except that instead of using momentum, we are leveled by this NLM. Okay, these quantum numbers. And instead of having continuous momentum, this is discrete.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, go ahead, please.
In the very first equation should not be there be a factor of omega. In usual quantum field theory, we when we do mode expansion, we have 1 upon under root of energy, so that when we differentiate and make the conjugate momentum operator, and when we multiply, the square root in the numerator and denominator cancels appropriately. So,
Yeah, so I think that probably depends on how you normalize the f. I have already absorbed those factors, I think, inside this f. Okay, this is something you can check probably. Okay, I'm not completely sure about this. Okay, it could be that there is a factor of omega, okay, which you may have to modify this by putting some omega factors here. Okay, so this is something I cannot say for sure, but it could be that there is some normalization factor over here. But I'll be defining my A in such a way that these commutation relations hold. Okay? Which basically means that I have to normalize the F's appropriately. Is that okay?
yes, clear.
I think, you are thinking of that there's normally there is a 2e factor over here, right? I think that's the factor you are worried about, right?
Yes.
And it's possible that this should be normalized not with as this, but with 2 omega NL. This is something you should be able to easily figure out by looking at these commutation relations. Okay, any other question? Okay. Now, one point I want to emphasize, which I have already said before, but let me now come back to this. And that is that the full SOD, 2 symmetry is not manifest. Full SOD, 2 symmetry is not manifest. In this formalism. And the manifest symmetry is time translation. Okay, which is of course there. And the other one is rotation. SOD rotation. SOD rotation. Okay, because you have the d-1 sphere, so there is an SO2. Rotational isometry is manifest. Okay. And this is similar to Lorentz transformation in normal quantum field theory. Transformation in QFT in flat spacetime. Okay, where we know that the canonical quantization breaks manifest Lorentz symmetry, even though it's there. And in fact, what one can show is that SOD, the full SOD, 2 relates all single particle states. So even though it looks like they have different energies, okay, for different NL, okay, they all can be transformed to each other under the full SOD, 2. Okay. And this is again analogous to Lorentz transformation in normal quantum field theory. We know the Lorentz transformation doesn't preserve energy. Okay. Nevertheless, it's a symmetry of the theory. Okay, it mixes energy and moment. Okay. So all of these states are in fact related by SOD, 2. So this is like Lorentz transformation in Minkowski space. So now let me turn to correlation functions. So we'll,
Ashok.
yes, go ahead, please.
So there were two things. So a couple of slides before you said that since the as full SOD, 2 is not manifest, effectively some attractive potential is being created, these coordinates.
Yes.
There I thought, I mean, it was not manifest in the sense of, if I look at this coordinate system, this T r theta coordinate system, then I can't figure out all the symmetries immediately, like just
That's
by
right.
looking at the metric. And there was, but in the quantization, there is another thing where I just pick a direction of time in canonical quantization. So we break manifest in just like Lorentz spacetime that you were pointing out.
Yes.
Because if I take Cartesian coordinates in Lorentz spacetime, then also like the canonical quantization would still pick a time direction. So there again, like manifest symmetry is lost, isometry of space-time.
Yes.
So this picking a time direction, I understand. But what is the relation of this manifest symmetry, losing manifest symmetry to coordinate choice and creating an attractive potential?
Well, the point attractive potential means what? The minimizing energy, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
energy is not Lorentz invariant, or not invariant under SOD, 2.
Okay.
Right? So it is true that we are minimizing energy, okay, by going to the center, but that's not a SOD, 2 invariant quantity.
Okay. All right. Okay, great. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so correlation function. So this is defined just as normal quantum field theory, time ordered vacuum expression of the time ordered product of operators. This is time ordering. And this can be calculated simply by substituting the phi's, okay, in terms of creation, annihilation operators and using the algebra. Okay. So you just use phi tr theta as sum over NLM, F NLM, A NLM plus Hermitian conjugate. Okay. Each phi you substitute, okay, and then you use the fact that A NLM on the vacuum equal to 0, and the other way, A vacuum A NLM dagger equal to 0. And use the commutation relations. Okay, so if you take the creation operators to the right, take the annihilation operators to the right, creation operators to the left, okay, and pick up the commutators on the way, and that can be used to calculate this. And one feature that it has is that this object, this for large Ri, goes as Ri to the minus delta I as Ri goes to infinity. This is not a surprise because it follows from the property of FNLM, right? The R dependence is basically coming from FNLM, and FNLM, as we have seen, for large R falls off as R to the minus delta. Okay, and that's all that. So there's only one delta here, so it's Ri to the minus delta. So given this observation, okay, you are now going to define what we call the boundary correlation function, which will play an important role. The product over I, phi of capital Xi. So the capital Xi will stand for boundary coordinates. Now I'm sure that I'll try to stick to this notation, okay, but I'm sure I'll keep using small xi even for boundary coordinates. But if you point it out, I'll rectify it. Okay, if you don't point it out, it will remain like small xi. Okay, but truly I want to use capital X for the boundary coordinates. Okay, ti theta I. Okay, so no ri here. Okay. And so this is defined as limit ri goes to infinity. Okay, so this is for every I of product over I ri to the minus delta, sorry, ri to the plus delta product over I phi of x. Okay. So you take this correlation function, so you know that it falls off as ri to the minus delta as ri goes to infinity. You multiply by ri to the delta, and whatever you get as the limit, okay, will now no longer be a function of ri, okay, but it will still be a function of ti and theta I, and that's what we call phi of x. Okay, this correlation function. Now, if you go back to this, this object is actually invariant under SOD, 2. So this is not manifest in the canonical formulation. Just like the in normal quantum field theory Minkowski's case, the full Lorentz invariance is not manifest. Okay, you break Lorentz invariance as you quantize, okay, but final correlation functions are Lorentz invariant. So similarly, this is also invariant under the full SOD, 2, and this we can see using path integral formulation. Okay, can be seen using a path integral description. But this one, the boundary correlation function, is actually not Lorentz, not invariant under SOD, 2. And the reason is the following. This one is not invariant under SOD, 2. And the reason is that R transforms under SOD, 2. So since the definition of these include a multiplication by power of R, okay, it's not invariant under SOD, 2. Okay. Nevertheless, not everything is lost. What you can show, the R does transform under SOD, 2, and in general, of course, for finite R, the transformation law is complicated. Okay. But for large R, R basically goes to some function of t and theta and the transformation parameter, what SOD, transformation you are using, times R. So R to the delta basically picks up the delta as part of this function. So although these are not invariant under SOD, 2, okay, one can say that these actually transform covariantly. covariantly under a semi. You basically have to transform them to compensate for this scaling of R. Okay, that's all there is to it. And finally, let me just say that this construction generalizes to multiple scalars, scalar fields of different masses, and also higher spin fields. Like vectors, tensor, etc. Okay, it's a bit more complicated, but it can be done. In most of our examples, we'll focus on scalars. Okay, but of course, the gravity plays an important role, right? So, for example, the spin 2 will certainly be there. Are there questions?
Yeah, one small question. Can one define S matrix elements by doing some LSZ reduction procedure? Or is it because of the presence of the attractive potential, we assume that the asymptotic states are not free and therefore LSZ reduction cannot hold?
Yeah, so it's not really LSZ reduction. I mean, you can think of this, what I defined here, as the analog of the LSZ reduction. Okay, as an analog of a S matrix, but this is not really strictly S matrix.
Okay.
One can ask how this is this related to the S matrix in the flat space limit, right? I mean, R goes to infinity limit is flat space, and it's a bit complicated. It's not just that these go over to the S matrix.
Okay. Thanks.
So these are what are called the boundary S matrix. Okay, even though this is not really S matrix. Now, we can also do this interacting theories. So far, we have been discussing free scalars. Using perturbation theory. Assuming that the interactions are small. And finally, one point which we will not discuss very much, but let me just say that in the full quantum gravity theory, we do not expect these to be well defined. Okay, the correlation functions that we introduced to be well defined. But the boundary correlation functions should still be okay. And that has to do with the fact that there is basically no local observable in quantum gravity. Okay, these are local operators. Since under metric fluctuation. The space-time points actually lose their identity. So what exactly you mean by phi of xi becomes ill-defined. Okay, what exactly you mean by xi becomes ill-defined because of the metric fluctuation. Okay. But this is near the boundary, and I mean we consider metric fluctuations which are sorry, the fluctuations die off at the boundary. So these are okay. So you keep the metric fixed at the boundary and let it fluctuate in the interior, and that's the reason why these become ill-defined, even though these are okay. Nevertheless, I mean, we'll focus on these later in these lectures, and we'll try to make sense of these in an approximate sense. Okay, even though you know that we cannot make sense of these in an exact sense. Okay. But certainly in perturbation theory, what we have done so far, there has been no problem, right? We can define and calculate this by following the procedure that I described. Okay, are there any questions?
Hello, sir. This perturbation parameter, what is it here that we are taking it to be small? And the second question is, when you're saying that phi of xi is ill-defined in the full theory, phi of small xi,
Yes.
then when we take this, presumably this must be in some notion of strong interaction in the bulk. And when we take that limit, do we still, I mean, does it still make sense to assume that its limit being fixed at the boundary makes sense?
Yeah, okay. First of all, the small parameter, suppose you have a phi cube theory, right? See, so far you have not even introduced interactions, but suppose you have a phi cube theory, then the small parameter will be the coefficient of the phi cube term. Okay, that's what I mean by saying that we assume that the interactions are small. Just like in normal quantum field theory, right? We do perturbation expansion in the coupling constants. Okay. Now this fact, right? This has to do with the fact that one aspect of this is there's an underlying gauge invariance, right? I mean, by making a general coordinate transformation, you can move these points around. So fixing these points doesn't really make sense, right? You have to fix a gauge. So one way to get around it that you have to first fix a gauge. Okay. But even then, when you have large gravitational fluctuations, these points can still lose their identities. Okay. But this is not a problem at the boundary. Okay. Because by definition, when you consider the quantum theory, when you do a path integral, you always freeze the fluctuations at a boundary. Okay, that's the definition of a path integral. So boundary values of the metric has to be fixed. Okay, that's the data, and then you do the path integral by letting the metric fluctuate in the interior. Okay, and that is the reason why these remain well defined, even if the interaction is strong. Okay, because that's the part of the definition of the path integral, because you specify the boundary data. Is that point clear?
Yeah, sort of. I guess so for now we are just saying that the boundary theory, the metric is just switched off at the boundary. That's the explanation. And for the coupling, we're just treating it like
a normal flat space time, right? When you quantize this field, you have to fix its boundary values.
Right. So we are not assuming this is coming from the boundary as coming from some limiting procedure of the bulk for now. We are not assuming this. Like it is just saying that we fix it at the metric is fixed at the boundary. That's all that is being stated.
Exactly, that's right.
Okay, and for the coupling, so far also we are not making any. We are just saying that there is some like coupling as a normal standard flat space-time quantum field theory, which is happening at the boundary. There's no other comments.
No, not at the boundary. Not at the boundary. In the bulk. So, that instead of taking the Klein-Gordon theory that I started with, I could have introduced a lambda phi cube interaction, right?
Okay.
So in the bulk, suppose there is a lambda phi cube interaction. And you can, then you have to take it, I mean, so far you have assumed free field, right? So if you have a lambda phi cube interaction, you have to take, that will have its effect on the correlation functions. And all I'm saying is that those can be calculated using part-production theory as long as lambda is small.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
So
Yes, go ahead, please.
So the fluctuation of the metric or the gravitational field corresponds to mass, right? In the bulk, to like mass or energy or something, like some T mu nu in the bulk.
Well, the metric couples to T mu nu, yes.
Yeah, I mean, in an empty universe with only the negative cosmological constant, would we expect the gravity to fluctuate? Because, I mean, even if we do expect it to fluctuate, that would correspond to a fluctuation in the lambda itself, and that would be equal at the bulk and at the bulk.
No.
Sorry, in the bulk.
Yeah, lambda is fixed. We are not, lambda is just a constant.
Yeah, the background.
Yeah, but the metric fluctuation, for example, is for a fixed lambda, right? I mean, that's not background, that's the data. Just like the lambda equal to 0, right? Minkowski space is a solution.
Yeah.
But a Schwarzschild black hole is also a solution, right? In Minkowski space.
Yeah.
Okay. So then the metric can fluctuate so that it produces Schwarzschild black hole.
Yeah, and that fluctuation is around some matter or something, like in the bulk, present in the bulk.
Not around some matter, just quantum fluctuation of the metric. So you are supposed to integrate over the metric, right? In the path integral, you are supposed to integrate over all possible metrics.
So
and
in the
those could be small or large.
Like Einstein's equation, what do we do with that then? I mean,
No, Einstein's equation is classical. Einstein's equation is classical, right? But I'm saying that when you do quantum path integral, you don't necessarily restrict yourself to solutions to equations of motion. Right? You let the field fluctuate and you do path integral. I mean, that's the meaning of path integral, right?
Yeah.
And then the classical limit picks up the classical solutions, right? Those are the saddle points which dominate in the h bar goes to 0 limit. But in general, you are supposed to integrate over all fluctuations. So for example, this metric can fluctuate so that these xi's sit inside a black hole.
Yeah.
Right. So those are the kinds of large fluctuations, right, which will make this ill-defined.
Yeah, I was trying to say that in normal QFT, when we consider something like a path integral and we dictate that the fluctuation at the boundary dies off, like the background is what is set at the boundary.
Yeah,
there,
that we are certainly doing here.
Yeah, but there, so far as I think, like it is that far away from our system setup, there are no particles or no interactions. But
yes,
but for gravity, everything else is interacting with gravity.
Yes.
Like consider our universe in the Big Bang model, where we have a uniform distribution of matter and everything.
Yes.
The boundary is as populated as the bulk in terms of the matter distribution. So in that sense, gravity
our
is
universe of
covered
course
everywhere.
is different because it's not static. I mean, it's a time
That's
background.
the problem. Yeah.
In ADS, that problem is not there. Right? It's a static background. And you can certainly define your path integral so that there is no metric fluctuation at the boundary, just like for other fields.
Like even if we populate the ADS universe with, let's say, a lot of but uniform matter everywhere, even at the boundary as much as it.
No, but then
but consider that it does not interfere too much in the classical sense with the background. The matter density is low, but it is uniform.
You cannot. We don't want to put uniform matter in the background. That we could have done also in Minkowski space, no?
Yeah.
The whole idea is that you don't uniform matter in the background. You put a boundary condition at the boundary. It's a vacuum. It's exactly the same in ADS. That in the asymptotic boundary, you assume that the system is in the vacuum. Whatever particles, etc., you want to excite, it's all in the interior. So all fields are in their vacuum state, right? And that's what is a boundary condition that one imposes while doing path integral. So in this sense, it's not any different from Minkowski space, right? Because you are just imposing this asymptotic boundary condition. That's the way you define path integral.
Yeah.
So you don't want to put uniform matter. Okay, it's always localized matter in the interior of ADS, whatever fluctuation happens. Any other question? Okay, so let me then proceed. Okay, so our goal will be to study ADS CFT correspondence. Okay, so let me just say what it is, and then I'll say a few words about CFT. Okay, and then next time we'll discuss more details about CFT. So basically, this says that the boundary correlation functions in a quantum gravity theory on ADS so quantum gravity basically means that you do whatever you did like for scalar fields, but you must also make gravity dynamic. Okay, so gravity is on a part of this, so there should be a tensor field. So these correspond to, so ADS CFT correspond, these correspond to correlation functions of a d-dimensional conformal field theory. So CFT stands for conformal field theory at the boundary of ADS. So this is a general statement, but for the particular example, particular coordinate system that we have chosen, for the coordinate system of choice, we have chosen the boundary is basically a real line times S d minus 1. What is real line? This is parameterized by the real line is parameterized by T. And this is parameterized by these angles, theta 1 to theta d minus 1. So this is a statement that these boundary correlation functions that we just defined, okay, they correspond to correlation function of a d-dimensional conformal field theory. This has no gravity. Okay, non-gravitational theory living at the boundary of ADS plus 1. But clearly, to understand this, okay, we have to first understand what CFTD means. Okay, what is a d-dimensional conformal field theory? So we need to understand what is CFTD. So for this, let's go back and begin with a quantum field theory. So we considered a QFT in D space-time dimension. Note that we are talking about one less space-time dimension because the boundary automatically loses one dimension. So here, for example, we lose a radial coordinate, the r coordinate, right? Because this is parameterized by the boundary is parameterized by T and the angles. So a quantum field theory in D dimension, okay, has D space-time dimension, has energy momentum tensor. Which actually plays a dual role. The first role that it plays is the way we normally learn energy momentum tensor, that if you integrate over the spatial slice of T0 mu, this gives the muth component of the field momentum. So the integral of the zero component of the energy momentum tensor gives the components of the moment, okay, energy and moment. But there's a second role that it plays, and that is that if we vary the background metric, you see here I said that there is no gravity, no dynamical gravity, but we can still put a quantum field theory in a fixed curved space-time, okay, which has a background metric G mu nu. Vary the background metric G mu nu by delta G mu nu. Then the action varies proportional to so P mu nu is also a measure of how much the action changes when you vary the background metric. And these two are related, and that has to do with the fact that the gravity couples to the energy momentum. Okay, that's why you see that the variation of the metric is the change in the action that is produced by the variation of the metric is determined by the energy momentum. Okay. And so this has this implication that if you take a correlation function, these are some operators in the conformal field theory. These changes let's say this G plus delta G is minus this is proportional to integral d dx. Let's see if I can move this down. This is integral d dx and then product y of xi times delta g mu of x d mu of x. This, of course, is just a set of fixed functions, given functions. Okay. So the change in the this correlation function, okay, under a change of the metric, is given by the integral of the correlation function, that is the original set of operators and t mu of x. This again is going to be important for us later. Okay, so the change in the correlation function is given by a formula like this. Are there questions?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
In the case of sphere S2, we have SO3 symmetry, and we see that any point is equivalent to any other. So we don't have any well-defined notion of boundary. In that case, the boundary does not exist. Similarly, in this case, ADS D plus 1, we have SO D comma 2 symmetry, and with that, you concluded that any 2 points in the space are equivalent. So how we are defined? So how the notion of boundary in ADS D plus 1 is well defined?
Yeah. So this is like, again, like Minkowski space. Okay. It is true that any 2 points are well defined when they are finitely separated. Okay. But this you are thinking in terms of the asymptotic limit. Okay. That you are really going to infinity. Another way of saying this is that you can put the boundary at a finite point, okay, finite r, large but finite r, in which case the boundary is not invariant under SOD comma 2. Okay, and that you saw, okay, it's not invariant under SOD comma 2 because if you put it at say r equal to r naught, okay, then r naught gets changed under SOD comma 2 transformation. Okay. Nevertheless, okay, the boundary correlation functions that we described, okay, transform covariantly under SOD comma 2. Is that point clear?
Yes, sir. Clear, sir.
So it is true that you cannot put a boundary that is invariant under SOD comma 2. Okay, because and precisely because of this fact that any point can be taken to any other point. So given a point on the boundary, you can make an SOD comma 2 transformation to move it to another point. Okay. But because you are allowing the scaling of R, and that's so this is the reason why these boundary correlation functions are covariant and not invariant.
So this covariance is valid only in the limit of like large R in some sense.
Exactly.
Because
yeah.
only.
Yeah. Otherwise, the transformation of R is more complicated. Okay. So it's only the boundary correlation functions in the limit of large R that is covariant. Any other question?
Sir, the last line or equation that you have written, is
Yes.
that supposed to be interpreted as a differential equation of sorts?
This one?
Yeah, this.
No, it's not a differential equation. It just says that if we knew how to calculate the correlation functions in a conformal field theory, so T mu nu is also another operator in the conformal field theory, right? If you knew how to calculate the correlation functions in a conformal field theory, you can figure out how the correlation functions will change when you change the background metric of the conformal field theory.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So of course, you can ask how do you calculate this, right? And that may require differential equations or something else, right? It depends on how you solve the conformal field theory. But as it stands, there's no differential equation here. Okay, it's just a formula that tells you how to calculate the response of a metric, response of the correlation function to a metric, change in the metric. Okay, so now let's look at CFT in flat space-time. Okay, which means that G mu nu is equal to eta mu nu. So CFT, okay, is a special class of quantum field theory. For which eta mu nu T mu nu equal to 0. So T mu nu is traceless. You can try to generalize it to general background metric. And you might guess what the generalization of this will be. That it should be G mu nu T mu nu equal to 0. Now it turns out that this is almost true, but not quite true. Okay, and it has its consequences. Not very serious ones, but yes, indeed, it has consequences, and that I'll discuss in a few minutes. Okay, in what sense this is not quite true. Okay, basically what happens is G mu nu, T mu nu, what one can show is not zero, but it is something that doesn't depend on any operator. Okay, it's an C number, okay, determined only in terms of G mu nu, basically. Okay, but we will see what its consequences. So ignoring this for the time being, this will tell us that product over I, y of x, G is equal to product over I, y of x at G plus delta G. What is delta G? Where this is equal to 1 plus 2 omega G. Omega here is an infinitesimal transformation. And the way you prove this is the following. That if you change G mu nu, we have delta G mu nu, G upper mu nu is as the inverse of this, right? So you see this is multiplying G mu nu by 1 plus 2 omega. So the inverse for infinitesimal omega will be minus 2 omega G mu nu. Inverse will get multiplied by 1 minus 2 omega. And so G mu nu, T mu nu will be minus 2 omega G mu nu, T mu. Sorry, delta G mu nu, T mu nu will be this minus 2 omega G mu nu, T mu nu, and that's 0. Okay, that's 0 by this equation. Okay, assuming this to be true. So if you go back to the previous slide, that basically means that under this kind of change, the correlation function doesn't change. Okay, and that's what we have here. That's what this equation is reflecting. Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
So let me write it again. So you have product over I, y of xi at G is product over I, y of xi at, let me write this as 1 plus 2 omega times G. Omega of x is any function of x. And so this is infinitesimal. Okay. But we can, of course, integrate it. We can build a finite transformation by many, many infinitesimal transformations. Okay. And so this basically translates to this is a finite transformation, a finite version of this. That this is product over I, y of xi at G, and this is that e to the 2 omega times G, where omega is any function. Omega of x is any function now. Okay, so here it was infinitesimal, but in this more general form, it's not infinitesimal anymore.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Should here be capital X?
Yes, thank you. All of these should be capital X. Okay, let me try to do this. I think I probably have changed it up in the previous ones also. Okay, here it's capillary. Okay. Now, as I said, there are some subtleties because of which this is not strictly true. Okay. And these subtleties I had discussed in the last year's lecture, but let me now state the result. So because of the subtleties, the actual true relation is the following: product over I, y prime of xi at e to the 2 omega g is given by product over I, y of xi at g times exponential of some functional of g mu nu and omega. So this just is the overall multiplicative factor, and that has to do with the fact that the g mu nu, t mu nu is not strictly 0, but it is given by some combination of g. But this is the general form. Okay, and this has to do with the fact that the symmetry that we discussed, right, actually also transforms the y's. Okay, for reasons that I'll not explain here, but as I said, I had done it in the last year's lectures. Okay. But this is a general form of the relation. Okay. So in a control field theory, the relationship takes this form, that if you take a metric, background metric, and scale it by some e to the 2 omega arbitrary function of x, and transform the y's appropriately, okay, then it's related to the original correlation function up to a multiplicative factor. Okay. So this is known. This functional is known, okay, not arbitrary. Okay. And in any case, it drops out if you consider normalized correlation functions. Which basically means that if you divide it, for example, okay, by the vacuum expression of the identity operator, okay, then this factor just cancels. So these transformations, okay, what y prime is, this of course depends on the particular operator y, okay, but there is a special class of operators, okay, which are called the primary operators, and this is the last thing I'll say today. So these, okay, if these are primary operators, for primary operators, the y prime takes the following form. Okay, so it just picks up some scale factor, okay, depending on omega. But there are certainly more general operators. Okay, for example, if y transforms as a primary, you can clearly convince yourself that the derivative of y doesn't transform as a primary. Okay, it has a more complicated transformation. But typically, what you can classify in a control field theory, you can classify operators, okay, by a set of primaries and their derivatives. Okay, so all operators are either primaries or derivatives of primaries, right? That's the way you can classify the operators in a CFT. Okay, I think I'll stop here. Are there questions?
So let's say we were writing correlation functions for, like, let's say let's say h mean, then in the bulk it has more number of components. It has, I mean, d to d plus d to d plus 1 by 2, I think.
Yes.
But if we take this h mu to the boundary, it should have less number of components, right? So how are we going to?
Yeah. So you have to basically do a gauge fixing. I didn't discuss gauge fields here, but there's a well-defined procedure to do that. Okay, so it's not just for H mu, even for normal gauge fields, right? You have to decide on what the boundary data you are specifying. But
so we aren't losing any information then.
no, we are not losing any information. It's just the boundary data have to be fixed appropriately, right? What you are saying is that for gauge fields, not all components of the gauge fields need to be specified at the boundary. Yeah. So that's true. I mean, but there is a well-defined procedure for doing that. Okay, what boundary data you need to specify for gauge fields, which includes, of course, metric, which is also has gauge invariance. So that's why I focused here on the scalars, right? Because the scalars, you don't have those complications, but those things have been understood. Okay, so we know how to deal with them. How to define the boundary correlation functions, even for gauge fields.
Okay.
Any other question?
So Ashok,
Yes.
so the initial this embedding space that you defined,
Yes.
like in the embedding space formalism, like these are the coordinates used, right, to define various generators and things like that.
Yes.
So where is the universal cover when one does embedding space formalism?
I think the universal cover you have to put in at the end. Right?
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But to the calculations, it won't affect. Like if I'm calculating some Green's function, some correlation function.
I think what will happen is that Green's function will have periodicity, but that's just part of life. In ADS, for example, in global ADS, the Green's functions do have periodicity.
Okay.
And that has to do with the fact that if you look at the omega NLs, right, they are integer quantized.
Okay.
All the omega NLs differ from each other by integers.
Yeah.
But that's just a feature. I mean, and it's not an accident. Okay? The way we have done it, it looks like an accident, but it's a consequence of the SOD D,2 symmetry of the theory.
Okay. But ultimately, in the end, we write it in terms of this. Let's say one way to do it is in the end we write it in terms of these RT coordinates and just unwind in T.
Exactly.
Then
that's right.
Okay.
Because the embedding space is a you can use for calculation, but ultimately the real coordinate system is not the embedding space, right?
Right.
It's the RT theta coordinate system.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Thanks.
Any other question? Okay, so if not, we'll then stop here and continue on Friday at 10 p.m.